Hi, welcome to Mindful Chatting, especially my private practice friends. Okay, let's talk about something that I've seen floating around online for years. And it usually sounds something like this. Business owners, did you know that you can take your family on vacation, have a board meeting, and write the whole thing off? And every time that I hear some version of this, I think, oh no, we need way more context than that. Because, yes, legitimate business meetings exist, and business retreats exist, business travel exists, and legitimate business expenses may be deductible. But no, you cannot necessarily take your family to Disneyland, discuss your private practice over churros for 20 minutes, and call everyone your board of directors and send the entire vacation to your accountant. That is not how any of this works. And so today we're going to be talking about what board meetings are, business meetings, business travel, private practice, and tax deductions. And most importantly, how do you use legitimate business meetings strategically without playing games with your taxes? And I want to give a quick disclaimer before we unpack this. I'm a clinician and a business owner, not your CPA or your tax attorney or your financial advisor. I'm giving you educational information and showing you how I approach the business planning side of things. Your tax professional should tell you what is deductible for your particular business and your tax situation and not go completely off of mine. I'm just trying to give you context from practice owner to practice owner. But let's unpack this together.
Welcome to Mindful Chatting, a podcast where therapy meets real life. I'm Kristen, a therapist, business owner, and a lifelong student of what it means to fully show up in our relationships, in our work, and in our healing. Here, we unpacked mental health concepts, explore mindfulness tools, and talk through the messy, beautiful, in-between moments that shape us. Whether you're a fellow clinician, a curious listener, or someone navigating your own growth, this space is for you. Let's chat.
I want to clear something up as we go into this first. A lot of small business owners use the phrase board meeting very casually. But whether your company is legally required to have a board meeting, what governance formalities apply, and what meetings are appropriate depends on your actual entity and governing documents. I know that sounds like a lot of jargon. And so I am less interested in teaching you call this a board meeting, and I'm more interested in having legitimate documented business meetings for your private practice. Because regardless of what you call them, there are very real reasons to periodically step outside the daily operations of your practice and ask you or anyone who's involved, what are we going? Where are we going? What's happening this quarter? What's working? What isn't? What are our financial goals of our business? What services are we trying to keep? What are we stopping? What's happening with our marketing? What risks do we need to address? What major investments do you think we should do coming up? That is not fake business activity. That's running a business. And all of those questions are super important and require a meeting for it. So here's where social media can get a little dangerous about the information that you're receiving as a practice owner. It takes a complicated tax principle and reduces it to do this, and it's a write-off. But a write-off isn't necessarily like a coupon for your business. And spending $1,000 doesn't like magically give you $1,000 back. A deduction generally reduces the taxable income. It isn't the government reimbursing you a purchase. So, more importantly, the IRS rules generally require deductible business expenses to be ordinary and necessary to your business. Business travel has like additional rules, and personal expenses just like don't magically become deductible because some business happened during your trip. So here's the question I want clinicians specifically to learn to ask themselves. Would I still have a legitimate business reason for this activity if there were no tax deduction attached to it? And that is a very different mindset when you're walking into business meetings. So, I want to talk about what a real business meeting could really look like for you and your business and your private practice. So, let's say where you're doing like a quarterly planning meeting for your practice. And before your meeting, you create an agenda. And maybe it includes some financial review where you go over your revenue, your expenses, maybe your profitability, some cash flow coming in, and then some upcoming expenses. And then you want to also talk about some clinical operations, and that can look like your current caseload, maybe some cancellations that have been happening over the quarter, documentation practices, how you want to move forward with scheduling, and maybe you want to go over some policies and procedures. And then you definitely want to talk about business development. And so that can look like maybe your referral sources that are coming in. What kind of marketing do you want to continue doing? How is your website looking? Maybe some products or services maybe that you want to try out, and what kind of networking needs to happen. And then maybe also on your agenda, you include risk and compliance. That could be your documentation practices that you have going, any insurance, contracts, policies, and any licensure considerations. And then lastly on your agenda, you have strategic planning, and that can look like your quarterly goals, your annual goals, the capacity that you have, maybe some new opportunities rolling in, or things that you're intentionally trying to stop. Now, we're not talking what happened to discuss business at dinner. We're talking about a deliberate business activity with an identifiable purpose. And that is where your agenda comes in. What are we talking about before we're getting into the business meeting?
If you want to understand your ADHD in a deeper way, I've created the ADHD Crash Course, and it walks you through ADHD step by step so that you can actually start understanding your brain and not shaming it. Everything's in small, doable lessons designed for your ADHD in mind. The link is in the show notes.
So, I wanted to give you some kind of framework that I kind of use before planning anything when it comes to any kind of business meeting or business travel. I think of it like the business test. So, B is business purpose. Why are we doing this? I want you to be very specific about how you document this for tax purposes. Not just talk about the business. That is not enough. You need to write, conduct quarter 3 financial review, establish quarter 4 revenue, marketing, and operational priorities. Now I know why I'm there. And that is where that agenda piece comes in before you create the business meeting. And that is what the U stands for, the useful agenda. I want you to create an agenda before the meeting, which is very specific. This is also incredibly helpful if you have ADHD because you're not just showing up to this business meeting hoping that you'll remember what you wanted to discuss. Your agenda becomes your executive functioning support. So, an example of this could be I meet with my social media manager maybe every 2 weeks. And even though it might necessarily be us meeting at a coffee shop, I bring an agenda. And that can look like an informal, me writing on a shared notes app, or it could be something that I type up and print out on paper. It doesn't necessarily manage the method. It's about what am I going to this business meeting to where my travel of my mileage or my car makes sense, the coffee that we're going to purchase, and anything else that we're doing while we're discussing what's on the agenda with my social media manager. S is substantiation. So we need to document what actually happened. So we have our agenda, but we need to also have some meeting notes while we're discussing these things. And the IRS emphasizes maintaining records sufficient to support deductions, and any business travel records can include time, place, expense, and business purpose, depending on the expense that's involved. So I want you to save these things. I don't want you to just make them and go, great, and then delete them when we're done. I want you to create a folder that you have on your desktop where you throw in your agenda, the meeting notes as you discuss these things, any decisions that you guys make. I want you to keep all of your receipts. That includes just that $5 coffee. I want you to think about relevant calendar records. So put in your record and invite that person to that meeting. Even if it is in a different location, I want you to create some kind of calendar record that it happened. and then any action items or follow-up things that both of you need to do. You shouldn't be trying to recreate the business purpose 11 months later when you're preparing your taxes. These should be something that you're doing as you're making the business meeting and as it's happening. Another idea for this is where AI can be a really great tool for you. Record the meeting, create a transcript, have it create a meeting notes and summary so that you guys can sit and casually talk about these particular things without worrying about, did I write everything down? I is individuals, and this one matters a lot. Why is each person there at this meeting, at this retreat, at this place? Your spouse being married to you doesn't automatically create a deductible business travel expense. I know that's crazy. So currently, IRS guidance generally says travel expenses for like a spouse, a dependent, or other accompanying person aren't deductible unless their applicable requirements are met. So that could include a bona fide business purpose. The rules can depend on the person's relationship to and the role of the business. Now, this is exactly where I want you talking to your CPA, not Instagram. Now, there are ways where you can hire your spouse and have a legitimate contract and pay them. This is where you're actually taking your employee on a business meeting or a business retreat, and that's where your CPA comes in to tell you what's deductible and what's not. So it's very important. Like if I were going to, let's say the same example of I'm going to meet my social media manager for coffee, we have a contract. We have something lined out of how much I'm paying this person, why she's there, what she's doing. I keep that documentation. So if I'm ever audited, I know why this person is hooked up to me, even if she might be a 1099 employee, not a W 2. We have a contract of what type of business that we're doing, and our meeting agenda and our meeting notes match the type of services that she offers me. So that coffee might be down the street, or that coffee might be in her home state if she lives far away from me. And could be necessary and ordinary. So, does this expense actually make sense for your business? So, the IRS describes an ordinary expense as one that's common and accepted in the trade or business, and a necessary expense as one helpful and appropriate for the business. So, that doesn't mean everything has to be cheap, but there needs to be a defensible relationship to the business. So, for example, if I'm meeting my social media manager for coffee, and let's say we're having an agenda, and let's say we have notes and we're discussing how we're going to do our marketing, and then let's decide that we want to do a lot of B roll footage that is clearly tied with the business. Like, let's say I want to go to a conference and it's in a different state. So most of that stuff is already tax deductible. But let's say I want to go out for coffee with her and she records me going to the conference and doing all of these things that are part of the marketing strategy of, let's say, becoming a therapist. That stuff is where we're implementing a meeting, but we're also creating something that's necessary for the business when it comes to marketing. That is just an example that I'm giving you of how you can kind of cross into, yes, the conference may be business deductible, but all the other things might not be. And so this is where we have to get a little creative about what are we using this information and how is it supporting the business, not just because I need coffee. Now, E is expenses need to be separated. And this is huge if you're combining your business and your personal activities on your retreats. Business and personal do not become one giant bucket for you. And depending on the facts, expenses may need to be allocated and personal expenses remain personal. The IRS specifically discusses separating costs and allocating business versus personal travel in situations where they both occur. So don't think this whole trip is deductible. I want you to think which specific expenses, if any, does my tax professional say qualify? And that is a much safer language. So, for example, going back to the social media manager example, I want you to think about how, yes, the conference is tax deductible, right? But if I'm just going to go meet my social media manager for coffee, well, and we're not really talking anything, let's say we're catching up, that coffee is not tax deductible. But if I go there and we have an agenda and we have meeting notes, that coffee becomes tax deductible. If we're going there and we're recording B-roll footage that I'm going to use for marketing about an upcoming course that I'm doing, that meeting becomes deductible. There are things that you have to get a little creative of. You have to support documentation to show what am I using this for.
For any clinicians tuning in, if insurance billing is the part of your practice that drains your soul, Headway will be your best friend. They get you credentialed, send you referrals, manage your billing, submit your claims, all the stuff none of us went to grad school for. It's free to join, and honestly, it's been a huge support for therapists who want to take insurance without drowning in the administration part. My link is in the show notes if you want to check it out.
All right, let's keep on to this business framework. S is schedule. If you're calling something a business retreat, where's the business? You need to actually schedule it. So an example could be from 9 to 11 a.m., we're going over finances. From 11 to 12, we're doing some strategy planning. From 1 to 2, we're talking about operations. And 2:30 to 3, we're doing some implementation planning. Then actually do it. This isn't just better documentation, it's a better business practice. And if this actually helps you feel like you're moving your practice because you're discussing things with members of your team and you want to create a retreat that takes you out of the business and makes you think a little bit more creative and out of the box, you can do it. Just document it. S is for specialist check. So I definitely want you to ask your professional. Bring the plan to your CPA before you do it, not after. And tell them, here's who's attending. Here's why we're having it. Here's where we're going. Here's this business agenda that I created. Here's this personal component to it. What can the business legitimately pay for or deduct? And that conversation is infinitely more valuable than trying to reverse engineer a deduction after your trip happened. So, and here's the funny thing about why I actually like business to retreats, because we can take the tax deduction out of this conversation completely. And I still think business retreats can be incredibly valuable to your business because sometimes you need physical distance from the day to day work to think differently about the business. And that's where it's like literally thinking outside of the box. So when I'm in my office, everything is like screaming for my attention. Emails, notes, clients, bills, content, calls. But when you intentionally create a different environment for strategic thinking, you can actually zoom out. And that's the part that I don't want lost in all of this tax talk. The meeting should have value if your accountant tells you that none of the associated travel is deductible. That's how you know you're starting your business from strategy rather than chasing a write off.
Here's a quick note for my clinicians listening. If you're looking for a charting and practice management system that doesn't make you want to scream, well, guess what? I use Therapy Notes. It's clean, reliable, HIPAA compliant, and honestly saves me hours every week. You can try it with my link in the show notes.
As I've personally got more intentional about running my practice, and this took a couple years in, I'll be honest, I've realized that being a CEO means I need to create time to actually make decisions before I'm forced to make them. I don't want every business decision to happen because something happened or something went wrong that made me step back and think about it. I want scheduled opportunities in my life to look at the bigger picture of my private practice. I want to think about questions like where are we and where are we going and what's working and what needs to change. And what does the next quarter require from us? And that's the real value of these meetings. The tax treatment is something I bring to a tax professional. The strategic value, though, that I get from these business retreats belongs to me. So here's some quick do's and don'ts of all of this tax jargon stuff. So do have a legitimate business purpose. Do create an agenda before the meeting. Do keep a contemporaneous records. That means you are writing business meeting notes as they're happening. Do separate business activity and costs from personal ones. Definitely keep those separated. And definitely ask how a CPA and the rules apply to your specific situation if you have a private practice. Do not assume that your spouse's travel is deductible simply because they're attending something with you. Don't assume that your entire trip becomes a business travel because you held one meeting during that time. Don't treat an entertainment as deductible just because the business was discussed at it. And don't create documentation after the fact to make a personal trip look like business. The IRS generally disallows entertainment expenses and generally limits qualifying business meals to 50%, and that is subject to exceptions. So, this week, I want you to forget about the trip for just a second. I want you to schedule your next quarterly business meeting and create a one-page agenda with it. I want you to think about questions like, where are we now? What's working for us? What's costing us time and money? What are our next 3 opportunities or priorities that need to happen? And what needs to change next quarter? That's the business practice I want you to steal from this episode. Not how do I write off a vacation, but how do I run my practice like an actual business owner? And if you're interested in making these quarterly goals, our upcoming episodes will talk about how to create quarterly business goals and break them down into weekly actionable steps, and also to do it for your personal life. There are plenty of people online who will teach you how to make your life look like a business expense. And that is not what I want for you. I want you to build a legitimate, profitable, sustainable private practice where you understand not only your numbers, but you document your decisions, you plan intentionally, and you have professionals and a cohort of people around you who understand the areas outside of your expertise. Have the meeting, take the retreat if it makes sense for your business, enjoy it, but just don't confuse the 3. Because good business strategy isn't about getting cute with all of the rules. It's about building something you don't have to be afraid to defend later. I want to thank you for joining me. And as always, be gentle with your mind.
One more thing before you go, and this helps me personally, staying present and grounded, which we all need, especially when your brain wants to spiral into disconnection. Me too. It's Brain FM. It's musically designed to help ADHD brains, well, really anyone's brain, focus, relax, or sleep, and I use it almost daily. If you want to try it, I've dropped my link in the show notes. And if you're looking for planning tools or ADHD-friendly resources, I'll keep a list of my favorite links in every episode.